10 p.m. Palm Beach, Florida. Donald Trump is sitting inside his house in Mar-a-Lago together with Pete Hegseth and CIA Director John Ratcliffe in a darkened room. The men are in direct contact with an Army general aboard the USS Gerald Ford, one of the largest aircraft carriers in the U.S. Navy. The ship is positioned near the coast of Venezuela, together with an entire armada of additional U.S. warships. Everyone in the room is tense, and finally, at 10:46 p.m., President Donald Trump gives the order: launch Operation Absolute Resolve. From this moment on, everything begins to move extremely fast. On the USS Gerald Ford, as well as on several other U.S. warships, a large number of aircraft are already standing by, ready to take off immediately. What follows next becomes one of the most impressive air operations in military history, because this is not just a matter of several jets and helicopters lifting off. Within the next few minutes, an extraordinary 150 U.S. military aircraft are airborne, flying toward Venezuela and heading straight for the capital, Caracas. As you can see on this map, Caracas lies almost directly on the coast, leaving Venezuela's military hardly any time to react. If the capital had been located farther inland, such an air operation would have been detected much earlier, and Nicolás Maduro would have had enough time to get himself to safety. That is exactly why everything had to happen so quickly. The first aircraft to reach the capital are several F-35 and F-22 Raptor fighter jets. These ultra-modern military aircraft have a very specific mission: to completely neutralize Venezuela's air defense systems. Venezuelan airspace, especially over Caracas, is considered to be well protected, in part because of Russian-made S-300 surface-to-air missile systems. These systems were proudly displayed at Venezuelan military parades and were supposedly intended to prevent foreign fighter jets and military aircraft from flying over the city. But the U.S. military knew that these Russian missile systems were largely a decoy. As reported by the New York Times, they were not operational at all and were instead almost entirely stored inside warehouses and military facilities. And it was precisely these storage facilities that became the first targets of the fighter jets. While still in flight, the aircraft launched their missiles directly at the S-300 launchers, destroying Venezuela's best opportunity to attack the Americans from the ground using missiles. Overall, it quickly became clear that Venezuela's air defense system was far weaker than initially assumed. According to the U.S. military, the country's Chinese radar systems were not even connected to one another, allowing American aircraft to move step-by-step closer to Caracas's airspace. Military analyst Jas Troy explained to the New York Times that Venezuela's air defense had suffered from a chain of failures. As a result, the United States encountered relatively little resistance. After the F-35 fighter jets destroyed the Russian S-300 systems, they reached Caracas and immediately attacked two of the most important targets in the entire city, Fort Tiuna and La Carlota. Fort Tiuna is essentially the heart of the Venezuelan military. It is a massive military complex, the seat of the Ministry of Defense, and perhaps most importantly, it is believed to be the primary hideout of President Nicolás Maduro. Then at around 2 a.m., parts of this enormous facility suddenly burst into flames. Just seconds later, the same thing happened at La Carlota, the city's largest military airport. Across Caracas, residents not only heard the powerful explosions, they also saw smoke rising from the struck targets. Along the coast, plumes of smoke also appeared above the industrial port of La Guaira and the naval base. Within just 10 minutes, the U.S. military had managed to completely neutralize Venezuela's defenses. Meanwhile, additional U.S. combat aircraft, along with so-called one-way drones, began destroying even more targets throughout Caracas. Antennas, power lines, and other critical infrastructure were struck from the air. By around 2:05 a.m., large parts of the city were without electricity. This blackout allowed U.S. aircraft to operate in near-total darkness. As later emerged, the United States had used a secret technology to disable the power grid of the Venezuelan capital, something Donald Trump described as a special expertise. It is suspected that the U.S. military temporarily shut down the capital's power supply through a cyber attack. What followed next was the most important phase of the entire mission, and this is where events become truly spectacular. Alongside the F-35 and F-22 fighter jets, more and more U.S. aircraft entered Venezuelan airspace. Long-range bombers such as the B-1B Lancer began securing the area, supported by EA-18G Growlers, aircraft designed to jam radar systems and, most importantly, escort and protect other U.S. aircraft. Because by this point, the deployment of the most crucial element of the operation had already begun: the Delta Force. Delta Force is one of America's most elite special operations units. Its missions include, among other things, hostage rescues, or, as in this case, the capture of so-called high-value targets, meaning top-level figures such as the president of another country. The Delta Force flew over Caracas in a large formation of the U.S. military's most advanced helicopters, protected by other U.S. fighter jets. They were flying in Black Hawk helicopters as well as massive Chinook transport helicopters. These helicopters had already been flying extremely low from the Venezuelan coast at an altitude of roughly 30 meters, because this was the most effective way to minimize detection by any remaining radar systems. At 2:01 a.m., the helicopters reached the military grounds of Fort Tiuna. Inside the complex stood a building that served as a safe house for Nicolás Maduro. Although the exact layout of the structure is not publicly known, it is known that the building was heavily secured, featuring armored steel doors, a large number of bodyguards, and even a panic room that was extremely difficult to access from the outside. And then everything unfolded very quickly. One of the massive helicopters hovered directly above the safe house. Within 3 minutes, numerous Delta Force soldiers were on the roof of the building. They were equipped not only with welding tools, but also with a mysterious classified weapon that would soon play a decisive role. Immediately after landing on the roof, the first soldiers forced their way into the building and deployed multiple smoke grenades to disorient the bodyguards. It took just 12 minutes before the Delta Force soldiers finally reached Maduro. At that moment, he was in the process of trying to reach the building's panic room together with his wife. To neutralize the bodyguards, the Delta Force also used the secret weapon mentioned earlier. According to one of the guards, a type of sonic or energy-based weapon was deployed. The bodyguard later described how he and his colleagues suddenly collapsed to the ground with blood running from their noses. Some of them even spat blood. Such experimental systems do in fact exist. So-called LRAD-style weapons emit extremely intense sound frequencies in a focused beam, effectively incapacitating people exposed to them. However, it remains highly questionable whether such systems were actually used during this operation, as there is so far only this single eyewitness account. What is certain is how quickly the entire assault unfolded. The Delta Force moved directly through the building, while Maduro's bodyguards were completely caught off guard and unprepared. There was hardly any gunfire, and after just a few minutes, the elite soldiers already had Maduro in their sights inside the safe house. The success of this mission was also the result of detailed long-term planning by the U.S. military. Together with the CIA, a group of spies had been inserted into Maduro's inner circle months earlier. These agents accompanied the president closely and passed on every possible piece of information to U.S. intelligence services, including what he ate for lunch, where he spent his time, and even what kind of pets he had. Because the spies were also familiar with the safe house, the U.S. military was able to build an exact replica of the building inside the United States and train the Delta Force operation in precise detail. That is why the soldiers knew exactly how to move through the structure. They intercepted Maduro and his wife moments before they were about to enter the panic room. Both were immediately captured by the soldiers and quickly transported to the helicopter waiting on the roof. The helicopters then flew straight back out to open sea, where Maduro and his wife were transferred to the massive naval cruiser Iwo Jima. By around 2 p.m., Maduro was already in New York, where he is currently being prosecuted by the U.S. government on charges of corruption, drug trafficking, and narco-terrorism. From a military and strategic perspective, the mission was extremely impressive. It was planned in absolute secrecy over 6 months by multiple U.S. agencies and executed with remarkable precision. However, the operation also resulted in around 100 fatalities, including 2 civilians. But perhaps the most important question remains this: was this operation really worth it for the United States and for Donald Trump? Strictly speaking, the political outcome of the mission was not truly successful. For Donald Trump, the stated goal was to overthrow the Maduro regime and free Venezuela from socialism. Trump also openly named another motivation for the operation. Above all, he wanted American companies to once again be able to extract Venezuela's oil. But as things stand now, the United States has neither gained control over the country's oil industry, nor has the government been overthrown. Immediately after the operation, the situation initially appeared promising. Many Venezuelans even celebrated Maduro's capture and hoped that democratic forces would come to power and free the country from the socialist dictatorship. But this expectation quickly failed. After Maduro's capture, his vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, assumed power. Rodriguez is not democratic. On the contrary, she follows the same political line as Maduro and had already supported both him and Hugo Chavez before. Venezuela, therefore, did not become a democracy. Trump's plan to rebuild Venezuela's oil industry with U.S. companies also appears to be in danger of failing. During meetings with American oil executives, companies such as ExxonMobil made it clear that they have no interest in extracting oil in Venezuela. The country is politically far too unstable, and even under stable conditions, modernizing the oil infrastructure could take decades. So here as well, Trump does not appear to have achieved his objectives so far. But now we want to know what you think. Was this military operation in Venezuela the right decision? Was it justified for the U.S. government to abduct Nicolas Maduro? And what is your opinion of Donald Trump's policies so far in general? Let us know in the comments. We are very curious, and we will see you next time.